Hello viewers, this is John. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to use the diamond diagram to identify simple to complex combination patterns in the game. Without much ado, let's get started. Diamond diagram is drawn like this on the board. And then we have the vertex of the diagram at 2, and then we have the vertex at 11, we have the vertex at 22, we have the vertex at 13. What this means is that if your opponent pieces are at the vertices of the diagram, it shows that those pieces at the vertices should be removed. So any one of the pieces on the vertex should be removed. Then if you draw the diagram further to your position, then what it means is that if your piece is on the vertex, then that piece is what you use to take the shots or to take the combination. So for instance, in this case, as we have a piece at 33, 33 can take the shot to king at 2. So 33 can be transported to 2, or 33 can move to 2. The same thing, 31 can also take the shot to 2, and then 42 can also take the shot to 2. So that's how the diamond diagram works for combination. So again, the opponent piece on the vertex of the diagram should be removed. If there's no piece there, it should alarm you that there is a combination in that particular section of the game. So your pieces on the vertex is what you are going to use to take the shots. That's how the diamond diagram works in identifying combination. First of all, to use the diamond diagram, we need to identify the weak structures of your opponent. So let's look at some basic weak structures. This formation here, or this arrangement, can be made weak when the piece at 13 or the piece at 12 is removed. So if you remove the piece at 12, the structure becomes weak. If you remove the piece at 13 too, the structure becomes weak. So let me show you what I mean. If we draw the diamond diagram, now from what we have learned, the opponent piece on the vertex of the diagram should be removed. So it tells you that the piece at 13 should be removed. So if this piece is removed, the structure becomes weak. So if 13 is removed, the structure becomes weak. Now, if we draw it this way too, it also tells you that the piece at 12 should be removed. So let's look at this structure also. So this one, if we draw the diamond diagram around it, we see that 24 is empty, 33 is empty, 44 is empty, 35 is also empty. This should alarm you that there's a combination in the game. So structures like this, you need to read the game very carefully to see if you can take any combination or you can take a shot in that game. Now another one too is this. So this one too, if we draw the diamond diagram, and it tells you that the piece at 37 should also be removed. All right, so let's take some examples. Let's look at this simple example here. As you have seen, this tail here, the piece at 18 can be weak when it is removed. So if we draw the diamond diagram, we know that the piece at 18 can be removed. So the piece at 27 will be able to remove the piece at 18 so that the shot can be taken. And then also, if you continue drawing the diagram, and we see that, as I said, your piece on the vertex of the diamond diagram is what we are going to use to take the shot. So this piece at 40 will be transported to 7, or we'll take the shot to the square at 7. So it goes like this. That's how it works. Now let's take another example. Let's look at this structure again. If you examine well, you see that when 19 is removed, the structure becomes weak. Again, let's draw the diamond diagram. Then we know that the piece at 19 can be removed. So from what we have learned, if your opponent piece is on the vertex of the diagram, then that piece should be removed. Then if you continue drawing the diagram, then your piece on the vertex is what will do the job for you. So to remove the piece at 19, we have a piece at 30 that can remove the piece at 19. It goes like this. Then let's look at one more simple example. Then we take some 3 complex ones. Again, we have the structure here. So we draw the diagram. Then again, we know that the piece at 13 should be removed. Now, if we continue drawing the diagram, if we continue to draw the diagram, then it tells you that the piece at 33 is what we are going to use to do the job. So we also have a piece at 42, but in this case 42 cannot do the job. The piece that can do the job is the piece at 33. So we remove the piece at 19, and then we give the piece at 37. So black has to take 2 pieces, then we take 3 pieces to king. That's how it works. The thing is, if you draw the diagram and let's say 2 of the vertices of the diagram are empty, it can also alarm you that there's a combination in that game. So you need to take your time and read the game very well to get that shot. So if you have 2 or more empty squares on the vertices of the diagram, then it should alarm you. So you need to take your time and read the game well. Alright, so let's move on to some complex shots. Now let's look at these shots. In this game, black played 14-19. So 14-19, we need to identify the weakness of this structure. So we see that black has an empty square at 5, an empty square at 14, an empty square at 23, and then an empty square at 12. So we can draw the diagram from 14. From 14. So we know that the vertices of the diagram are all empty. So when you come to your side, we see a piece at 32 and then a piece at 43. So the piece at 43 can move to king at 5. We can take that shot. So how do we do that? So we need a piece at 38. We can transport black piece to 38. How do we do that? We can transport the piece at 18 to 38. So we give out. So black took it. Again, the next thing we need to do is to transport a piece to 28. So we can transport the piece at 26 to 28. In my next lesson, I'll teach you the skills involved in transporting pieces. So we can give out 37, and then black will take 2 pieces to 28, and then we take the short. So 43 will now be transported to square 5, or we take the short to square 5. So let's look at another complex one. So this one, black played 21-27. So black played 21-27. So white took that piece, and then we have this. Now, if you look at the structure very well, we see that 9 is empty, 20 is empty, 18 is empty. So if you draw the diagram, so we see that the piece at the vertex of the diamond diagram at 38 is what will do the job for us. So this piece will do the job, will take the shot. So what do? We need to transport a piece to 22, and then we transport a piece to 32. Then 38 can take the shot. So we move this, then we transport this to 32, then we take the shot to 29. Let's look at one more example. So again, as we saw, this is a triangle. So the triangle formation or the pyramid formation. So this arrangement, as we said, we can remove 18 and 19. Let's look at the structure. Which one can we remove? So we see the piece at 18 and the piece at 19. So if you draw the diagram, then we see that 38 can do the job. So how do we do that? So first of all, we have a piece at 20. As I said, the piece on the vertex of the diagram should be removed. So we need to remove the piece at 20 first. So we remove the piece at 20. Then the piece at 18 will be removed. So again, we need a piece at 22. So we need to move this piece 21 to 17 to call 11, or to transport 11 to 22. Then we can take the shot. Then the piece at 41 will move to 32. All right, let's take the last example. In this case, black played 21-27. So now, in this position, we see again that the spaces in black pieces, we have a space at 11, 2, and then 22. If we draw the diamond diagram, then we see that the positions are empty. Also, we have square at 2 is empty, the square at 11 is also empty, the square at 22 is empty. So we can take the shot. Which piece can we use to take the shot? We can use the piece at 42. So as I said, your piece on the vertex of the diamond diagram is what you use to take the shot. So how do you do that? So first of all, we need to call a piece to 27. A piece must come to 27. So what you do is to move the piece at 32 to 27. Then black will take the piece at 10. Then we can call the piece at 16 to 31. So we move, black takes the piece, and then we call the piece at 16 to 27. Then we take the shots. Okay. So thank you very much for watching. This is how the diamond diagram works, and I will bring you more on some of the complex shots by using the diamond diagram. So stay with me. We have a lot to learn. Thank you very much for watching my videos.